Greetings, my name is Cameron Miller and this is Trinity Place in Geneva, New York. And this is a reflection on the lectionary readings for the fifth Sunday of Epiphany. And we don't get no respect, clergy that is. I won't argue that we should, but you might be surprised to know that what was once a respected profession has slipped quite a bit. In the healthcare industry, for instance, clergy are more often than not treated as a nuisance, if not a hazard. And in the business world, we're naive and we don't know the difference between a bottom line and a bottom. In the public life and politics, we are the professional prayers, window dressing meant to be seen but not heard. So this little story about Jesus telling the professionals how to fish and watching them flail in despair from their sudden success is a lovely story about pulling one over on the smug specialists, none of which has really anything to do with the story. It does have to do, though, with feeling inadequate in the face of a serious challenge. 2013, for example. After having moved to Geneva, New York, imagining that Katie and I might find a home in which to retire someday, I met with the then treasurer of Trinity Church. It was the week before the annual parish meeting, and together it was the first time we had a chance together to go over the books. And he had sent me some financial reports before I moved, but honestly, I couldn't decipher them. And when we finished that first session, he said to me, "You've got 5 years." Actually, I don't remember how many years it was. I just remember the finitude of it all. Now, I won't lie to you. I hurriedly calculated in my mind how many years I needed to work before retiring. That was the hospice chaplain in me, accepting that there was no hope for the patient's survival. Then the creative problem solver in me went to work. What could we do? I can get rather kind of obsessive when confronted with a challenge. Now, mostly though, I just felt inadequate. I didn't know the people here. I didn't know the city. I didn't know the building. I had been hired only half-time because that's what I wanted, because I was a writer now and I wanted that part of my life to flourish. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw God. This is the reading from Isaiah today. Seraphs were all around, each one with 6 wings, and they sang out to each other, and the whole place shook at the sound of their voices, and the temple was full of smoke. And I said, "Woe is me! I'm a creature of unclean lips, standing here in the presence of God, and I live among a people of unclean lips, and yet my eyes have seen God." Then one of the seraphs flew to me, holding a live coal that had been taken from the altar with a pair of tongs. And the seraph touched my mouth with it and cleansed my lips, so that when I heard the voice of God ask, "Whom shall I send?" I felt my lips open, and my mouth formed these words, "Here am I, send me." Now that's an amazing vision, or dream, or hallucination, but it boils down to the devastating knowledge of just how puny and imperfect and pitiful Isaiah felt in contrast to the indescribable magnificence of the Creator of the universe. And it was only then, only in the presence of his own nothingness before the astounding everythingness of God, that he understood. Even though we cannot, God can, and sometimes does. Suddenly he understood God can and God will give us what it takes to open our mouths to say yes. Sometimes because of God, not because of our own will or capacities, the yes comes out. And then things happen. Things happen that were supposed to happen. Sometimes because of God and because of mystical seraphs unleashed in the world, not because of our own highly sophisticated professional selves, stuff happens. Stuff happens that wasn't supposed to happen. Stuff happens that we have nothing to do with, and stuff that makes things turn out to be okay, at least in the moment. Back in January 2013, Katie and I were living apart. She was finishing up her job in Vermont for 6 months while I set down roots here. And I tried to be positive and put a positive spin on things, but the more she knew, the more skeptical she was, and why not? Because deep down I was skeptical too. Now, you won't be filled with confidence when I tell you that my strategy was surrender. When faced with the impossible, like quitting drinking and drugs, surrender isn't a half-bad idea. I don't do it very often because I'm lousy at it. I like power and control a whole lot better. But sometimes I recognize when to surrender. Surrender is when we look up and we suddenly realize how enormously inadequate we are before the task that is hovering before us. It comes on suddenly, almost in a flash, and we see how monstrously enormous God is. Surrender is when we cry uncle into the mouth of heaven and then admit that we are powerless before something that has defeated us. Sometimes, and this is the most terrifying, we surrender to something that may even have the capability to kill us. Woe is me. Woe is me, we cannot succeed. We cannot win. We cannot even survive without you, O God. That's surrender. I suspect when we hear weird stuff like the reading from Isaiah, it's hard not to dismiss it as hallucinations or psychosis or just plain fraud. But truly, it's not all that weird. In fact, there's not a doubt in my mind that all of us, including you, have had that kind of an experience. A moment of utter and astounding powerlessness before a task or an event or a threat. And our response has been some version of woe is me. And I suspect that when we did surrender, there appeared a seraph of some kind, not as imaginative as Isaiah's six-winged creatures, but something or someone who put a hot coal on our lips, a spark of light that changed or turned it all around in some way, if only for a moment. Come on, I know that's happened to you. And I thank God that it's happened to me. You may never have thought about that experience that you've had as an Isaiah moment, but Isaiah is describing a moment like the one that you and I have had. There are strange moments in our lives. Those moments of powerlessness, when the power greater than ourselves reaches out to us once we have surrendered. Now, the story of Jesus inviting Peter to join him also sprang from a moment of powerlessness. Peter does not ask Jesus for help with fishing. He doesn't need help with fishing, not from some stinking rabbi. Fishing is his business. He's a professional. He's been fishing his whole life. He's making a living at it. He knows what to do and when to do it. He commands respect among his peers. He's got pride. He knows all about this thing because it's his thing. He doesn't need some itinerant preacher telling him how to do his thing. His thing has nothing to do with God. It's his thing. It's his business. It is business. It's economics. It's worldly. It's professional. It's personal. It's real. It's nitty-gritty. It's his thing. In other words, it's our thing, not God's thing. Let's just get that straight, Jesus. Of course, Peter was wrong, and he was about to have a painful moment of powerlessness to remind him that he was wrong. It was not his thing, and it never is just our thing or my thing. Jesus steps into Peter's thing and claims dominion for God over all things: business, economics, professional endeavors, education, healthcare, politics, all the real things. In one terrible moment of awakening, Peter stands in the astounding presence of God and experiences his own powerlessness. In one awful moment, he realizes the way things really are. And he is utterly devastated to discover that God is literally present in all things. And nothing we do is divorced from God. The sheer enormity of God slams Peter on his butt, and he begs Jesus to get away from him. Get away from him because he's a man of unclean lips among people of unclean lips. In other words, Peter realizes the enormity of the distance between himself and Jesus. And he feels as if he doesn't even belong in the same planet with the guy. Get away from me, Jesus, Peter says, for I'm a man of unclean lips. Jesus is a seraph, flying toward him with a hot coal in his hand. 2013 turned into 2022. The story we began together is still not done. And in the meantime, we had to learn to surrender to a pandemic. Now, this is not a fairy tale. We all know that there were many hard things about 2013 and subsequently leaving the building at 520 South Main Street. Since the Inn Project hasn't taken ownership yet and we're still in limbo, we know what it is to wait and wait and wait. But in my experience, surrender creates possibility. Surrender activates opportunity. Surrender to our own powerlessness makes room for the power greater than ourselves to empower us. I'm going to go out on a limb here right now and predict that there is a seraph circling right now somewhere in your life. Right now. There is a seraph just waiting to put a burning coal on your lips. And when it does, it'll consume the distance between you and God for just one moment. For just one moment long enough for you to say, I surrender. Maybe it'll even be in a I surrender, send me. Maybe it'll be that kind of moment. Well, I realize that these are just crazy old stories and bizarre metaphors. And I may sound crazy for talking about them and applying them to you and me. Surely nothing like a seraph could really happen. Not in the real world. Because in the real world, we're in charge, right? Peace be with you.